I mean, are there any services that you've come across where you'd think it's worth steering clear of them, or are there any things that people should look out for when they're doing these deals? Because I'll give you an example. I did something in the Reeperbahn Festival, and there was a guy from one company, and it was all, this is DIY, and you can do this, and we offer this, and it's not like a record company, you get all this much more money. I'm like, yeah, but if I then do a record deal, can I get my music taken down from your service? And he was like, well, yeah. And I'm like, well, but how long do I have to wait till it comes off your service? And I think they're tying people in for at least 6 months or something.
I mean, you tend to get what you pay for in respect. If you're going for a very, very cheap service that's offering you either a very low fee or a very low distribution margin, you're going to have a limited amount of feedback from those people. You're going to be able to place a limited amount of demands on them. And not to name names in a nasty way, but there's an American company called CD Baby, which built a business around just shoving loads of stuff out there. And a lot of people who signed up with them early on later became pretty disenchanted because there were problems and they couldn't get them fixed, or it was getting supplied to places they didn't know where it was going. And the thing is, before you sign with anyone, especially if it's like an exclusive deal, you need to vet your partner, you need to understand what they do, you need to work out whether they will actually deliver on the promises they're making for you. And if the answer is not yes, find another partner, because there's a load of people out there to work with.
I mean, this sounds very straightforward, but I mean, I struggle with technology. I had to get, mates of mine to set up my new camera there and stuff. I mean, I wouldn't have a fucking clue, right? And I know that even like people that are younger than me aren't necessarily that confident that they would know how to sort of vet a company. I mean, Scott, have you got any sort of tips? Are there any things that you'd just be like, don't touch that?
No, I wouldn't. But maybe because to keep it from being so nebulous, we'll bring it down one level, and it's maybe about grouping things. So, you want to, about putting music out for sale. So it's in iTunes. There's really two kinds of services. The cheap ones where you just pay a flat fee and they'll put it into a number of stores, but you don't get any service. And distribution companies, Fine Tunes, IOTA, Orchard, there's a couple dozen of us that take a percentage but offer greater services. Then there's things that everyone knows, like the social networking tools, the Facebooks and Twitter and MySpace. Yeah, they still exist. Then there's a whole nother part of the world that everyone should be in, which is all about the analytics, understanding what's happening. Because in the past, we didn't know what was going on. If you sent a song to radio, you just knew, how many spins it was getting, and that was it. Or you ship something to retail, you knew how many it sold, but not who bought it, So now we're in a world where we can actually understand things, and there's companies like Music Metric and Trender and all these companies that can really look at what's happening in the online world, both social media. How is your Facebook and your Twitter going? How many people are following? What are the trends? Is it going up and down? And how many people are active? And then they'll look at the blogosphere. How many people are talking about you? And you can really kind of look at what's happening rather than just guess. And then there's a lot of other things where maybe I'd put them into the kind of delivery world of things like SoundCloud. So instead of sending MP3 files, or definitely not CDs, but if you want people to hear your music, there's things like SoundCloud, or setting up a Dropbox. Do you guys know about Dropbox? Or You Send It, which, free. These are all free things. And then kind of the last piece, although there's more groups, maybe a direct-to-consumer approach. So those are things like Topspin and Sandbag, where these are companies that set that up for you.
I mean, I noticed the last year we had 3 people talking about Topspin on a panel, and no one knew what it did except for the people sitting on the stage, and I wasn't one of those people. So I've this is one of the other things that I find really interesting, is that, you've obviously mentioned a whole load of different services that obviously provide different roles as well within the whole setup. What interests me is that it's almost a field to itself. You're saying, David, that, record companies don't really get it, so they come to you. You're on the you're on the board of the BPI, so you're sitting there with the heads of really big record companies. Is your impression that they've managed to catch up, that they're on this, that they're kind of be able to deal with all these different media?
Yeah, absolutely. If you talk to anyone at the labels, forget about the propaganda stuff. Just see what they're doing with breaking artists. They absolutely are on top of it, and they manage it. And again, the problem for a DIY artist is now that everything opened up, because 10 or 15 years ago, if you entered the music business, you would have complained that you don't have access to the marketplace. You don't have access to, readers of Enemy and Q and listeners of Six Music. Now you actually have access to those people. You have access to their ability to purchase. But how you deal with them is so far more sophisticated than it was 10 or 15 years ago, that it makes it really difficult to do just on your own. So yes, you should avail yourself to all these tools, but to me, the first thing a DIY artist needs to do is start to put their team together. Get their manager. Again, you can have a record label, it's how you relate to them. Are you a slave to them, or are you making some records coming to them with already building a fan base and then licensing a recording? Or
so you'd say, the first thing you should do is get your team together, and I find the great benefit of the sort of digital DIY era is that you actually don't need to do that. You can literally just get on and do it. And the worst thing about the sort of previous situation where there are all these gatekeepers whose permission you needed almost to get involved in the music industry. It's like you had to get buy-in from some guy at a label. It's like, well, now some guy at a label is just an arse like me with the fucking, a desk in his spare room and the internet. That's really all it is. And you can just get on and do it. And then as you start doing it, you'll figure out the things you're crap at and you try and solve those problems. Like our first band, for example, the guitarist happened to do a lot of booking. So it's like, well, the first priority is therefore not a booking agent, because we can half-ass that as we go for the time being. The priorities became, other things like, okay, well, they never answer emails. We've got to sort that out. That's the first thing we've got to sort out. But the best thing about it is that you really can just get going. And you can find the services that can start plugging these gaps. And then as you work, you can figure out where your problems are.
What services would you use then? What was useful for you to plug these gaps?
To be honest, the most useful thing for us was always personal relationships. That's why Twitter and Facebook are incredible, because it's like you say, the way you interact with a lot of the people higher up the musical food chain, because we've been a label for 2 years. We are very, very small fry. But the way that you interact with the people further up the food chain now is very, very different. I'm at least now on talking terms on Twitter with half the music journalists in London. Not because they think of me as a blogger, and it's just, you make a couple of comments and then you find yourself exchange. I don't ever try and pitch to them, because that would feel sort of dirty, but I've got a relationship with them now where every once in a while they'll get a package through the post from me. But we've kind of been having an on-off sort of conversation on Twitter for the last year or so. So they're kind of aware of who I am. And as soon as you've broken that barrier, that somebody's kind of aware of what it is that's landed, then that's a large part of the battle, I think. So actually, and I tell you actually what made a huge difference. I started using things like SoundCloud and Bandcamp embeds in my personal Facebook page, and I sent out promotional MP3s on a huge mailing list to really good, solid blog contacts, people who I knew were in theory interested. I went onto the message board that I use as a music blogger and said, oh, by the way, we have some releases. If you'd like to review them, here's a downloadable copy. And we got a few hundred listens. And when those few hundred went into the thousands of listens was when I quite literally just went on Twitter and said, oh, here's a new giveaway track from the label, whatever it is. A few dozen people retweeted it. A few dozen people embedded it on their Facebook page, and the number of listens that we were getting there just rocketed. And things like that just make all the difference, as far as I can see. There's an argument that you're preaching to the converted. You're not finding new fans doing that, but the audience is there, and you can reach them directly. And for me, the one thing that I fucking hate is somebody saying, "Nah, you can't do that." Like you phone up a festival, it's like, "Nah, your bands aren't very good. We're not putting you on." Fuck off. And the best thing about all this kind of stuff is that you can ignore all of these people and you can get out there and you can find the people who are
Well, you say this, right? And I mean, I think this is what's interesting. You fair enough, Merceau have ended up playing Glastonbury and Rockness, right? But, you know, there is also the fact that in most cases you could be getting all this attention online through all these different things, but surely if you're signed to the right label, you can leapfrog various rungs of this sort of greasy pole, and bang, suddenly you're on. You're not doing tea break at Tea in the Park.
You can be absolutely certain that something coming through the post from Chemical Underground has about 20 times the impact than a little smiley Toad face song by Toad Records when it lands on a journalist. No, I mean, seriously. You know, it makes a huge, getting the right record label it will make a massive difference. But as with bands and as with digital platforms, I mean, there are at least 2 jackass internet record labels in this room as we speak. You know, sorry? But, you know, there's lots and lots of crap record labels out there. And as a band, you can lose your best record by working with somebody who's not up to the task. You have to be really careful because, you know, a good record label is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. But you don't necessarily need these people anymore, and they have to prove themselves to be worth it, because you only get one debut album, and you can't re-release it 6 months later with somebody else, or, you know, because you realise that you made a mistake. I think you have to be.
So you better putting really out yourself careful.
If you don't find somebody you really trust to do a good job, yes, I'd say hold on to absolutely everything. That's your default should be to hold on to everything: publishing, booking, release, everything. And if somebody comes in and shows you that they're good enough to take that off you and will actually really add something, then go for it, and it will make a big difference. But don't go rushing for a label because you get signed, because you might get signed to somebody like me who's too small to make that much of an impact. You know,
This is, you know, it's funny because I've listened to so many things and I keep thinking, I've got to ask Stewart what he thinks about this, right? And I've got about half a dozen questions. I can remember about 2. But I think the first one is, you know, you're listening to all these things that, you know, now a label should be doing. I mean, you started out when the internet was really just beginning. And what's it been like for you? I mean, have you suddenly had to learn how to do all these extra things, I mean, in order to survive, in order to keep on attracting artists? Or do you find that, you know, a lot of the time, because I read last week that a survey, 3/4 of bands still want a record deal. So, I mean, do you find that people are generally like, well, you're Chemical Underground, we don't really mind if you've got like a kind of bunch of, you know, geeks that can sort out all the online promotion and the analytics and everything else?
I kind of dreading you asking me a question because I've lost my train of thought. My train of thought about 5 times over the last. I mean,
right, no heckling today, Bruce. We've not got enough time. You can heckle afterwards.
I mean, I think, to be honest with you, I spend a large part of my time willfully trying to ignore all of the new things that are coming up online at the moment. If you were to ask me to name, you know, half a dozen of the new platforms that are out there, I would be struggling. I actually just, it comes back to something we talked about earlier on, and I think that the idea that the internet has been an absolute force for good is bullshit. It has taken the filter away. The floodgates have opened. It's a riot. It's a hell, a chaotic hell of mediocrity. No, but, you know, I'm not trying, I'm saying that that is...
all the old people clapping, go on.
No, but it's the difficulty that we're all faced with, whether you're a band, an artist, a label. You have this white noise, this babble of, you know, platforms and products and social networking and everything there, and it's incredibly difficult from my point of view as a label to filter through them all and figure out which ones are effective, which ones are worth the investment of our time as a label, of increasingly the band's time.